Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina at CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Celtic inspired wirework cross. Now in this case here I chose to make pendants out of them, but I do also think they could make pretty cute earrings. But obviously how you choose to use them is completely up to you. But if you want to learn how to make your own Celtic cross, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now the two different gauges of wire that I have here are both regular round copper wire. The first one is a 0.8mm and this is going to be the base wire that we're using to make the cross with. The other wire here is a fine 0.25mm wire. Now I'm using this to add in beads, so obviously if you don't want to add beads in, you don't need this wire. And then as for the beads here, I'm using some 3mm rounds. Now these specific ones are silver coated hematite and they're faceted as well. Of course you can use whatever you want to, as long as the size fits within your design. Now you can check out the description box below the video. I'm going to put some useful links down there. Otherwise, let's get our materials ready and let's get started. So then I'm going to start out working with my 0.8mm wire here, so the structure wire. Now I'm not going to cut off a length because it's a little hard to know exactly how much I'm going to need. So what I'm actually just doing is working with this still attached to the reel. And I just have it handy next to me. You can just release more wire whenever you need it. So I'm going to just be working from one end of the wire here. And what I'm also going to be using are these 6-step bell making pliers, because I like to use these because I know exactly what size loop or shape I'm going to get using these. You could use round nose pliers, but obviously because they're tapered, it's a little bit more uneven. So it's up to you, but I do highly recommend that. So I'm going to be using these pliers here to do it freehand. Now obviously just try and get it as symmetrical as you can. And what I'm also going to do is I'm using the second smallest step on my pliers there. So out of the two on the tip, it's the large one. And then I'm placing my pliers and my wire here a little bit in from the end, roughly about 5 centimeters or so, just so we have that to kind of finish off the shape with once we got it all in place. Then we need to start shaping this. Now we're kind of going to keep going around and around as if it's a spiral, but then obviously just in the shape that we want. So I'm just going to start making my first little, I guess you could call it loop. So I'm crossing this long end of the wire that's still attached to the reel over the other end. And we have our first little loop there. And then that becomes the size of the step on my pliers. Now, it's up to you as well what size you want this. So you'll determine that as you're doing this first round that we're going to be doing. So I'm going to place my pliers, again making sure I'm using that same step, at the point on the wire here where I want the next loop to be. Now I just need to move my wire around a little bit, get it a little bit easier to work with. So you could also have a sketch or something that you're going off of, obviously measure it or something, but this is going to basically be the, you can call it arm out to the one side. So you want to place the plier where you want that to be. And like I mentioned, as for this first one here, this is kind of what determines how large your cross is going to end up being. And it's not really important to get it symmetrical yet, that's not till we get further along. But then we need to do a loop here as well. So just bring your wire around that step on your pliers in the same way that we did here. So that means we also need to bring this over. We're constantly bringing the long end of the wire that we're working with that's attached to the reel over everything else. And then you can see we have a similar step to the first one. And then this is coming downwards, which is then going to be coming down towards the bottom of the cross. So this is where you want to start thinking a little bit about symmetry. Because obviously you then want this to be opposite the top one. And again, you can also use this to determine the size of it. So basically how far down you want this to go. So take the pliers out and then start placing them further down. Now obviously you want this bit to be longer than the first distance up there to get that proper cross shape. And don't worry too much about the symmetry being perfect just now, just kind of get it as good as you can, but we can still make adjustments. And remember to bring this over. And then all the way around like that. But make sure now that the symmetry starts by bringing this kind of coming up to start mirroring the other side. And also we don't want the wire here to be too straight or anything. It kind of looks nice being a bit more curved. So you can always do that with your fingers and hands, kind of warm up the wire and put a bit of a curve into it so it's not too straight. And you can see it's coming up towards having to do the final one, but I like to just take the pliers out and just have a little look at it. Then I can see I just want this to curve a bit. This can still be just the open end there, but I just like to kind of be able to see the symmetry to know where I'm going to need to put my pliers for this final one. So try and picture it here. Obviously this one needs to be as similar to the one on the opposite side as possible. And start. So obviously the length here as well needs to be as close to the length on that side as possible. Start bringing it around and keep an eye on the symmetry as I'm doing it, because in case I need to adjust anything, I actually like to just kind of take my pliers out before I finish it, just to double check. So kind of hold it how it would sit, and if it seems to look pretty good, then you can continue, put your pliers back in, and then just keep bringing the wire around here, or turning your pliers, and then have this, the long end, the open end that we're working with, coming up towards the very first little loop that we did. And then if I just remove my pliers, we can just have a little look and see how we feel like it looks there. Because if there is anything, we could still do slight adjustments for the symmetry. Because what you could do is slightly open up a loop a little bit and then pull the wire more the other way, and that will just move it a little bit up the wire. But we can't do major adjustments, but just slight ones without affecting the wire too much. But then when you're happy with how the basic shape and the symmetry looks, something a bit like that, then we need to start doing the next round. So to do that, what I'm going to do first of all is just have a look and make sure, obviously I'm happy with the shape, but then the point here, the open end where we originally started and the length of wire that left, I want to kind of put that in the right place. I'm not going to finish off yet, not until we have the shape in place, but I want the distance on that side to be about the same as that side. So before I start bringing this wire around to secure it in place, I'm just going to check that and feel that it's about there, and I'm going to put my thumb on that loop and my other finger on the wire behind it, so the tail, and hold on to it nicely so it doesn't move, ideally, and then taking my long end of the wire, and then it's coming over the top of everything. What I then need to do is just gently start bringing it around. Try and keep a nice curve in it, so don't do any sharp angles, around the back of that very first loop that we did. So like this, and then start to come over the top, back over the top of it. And then out towards the other side. Now this is basically making a bit of a loop, just like we did with the pliers, but obviously we're just using the wire itself. So that's kind of attached now, and you can see that's why I wanted to hold on to that nicely, because it could move a little bit while we're using and moving this wire, but try and avoid that. And then it's coming out towards the loop on the side there, so we need to do the same thing. So I like to kind of hold on to the previous loop that I just did, and then start to bring it around the back of the next loop here, over the top and around the front. So something a bit like this. And what I also kind of like to do is, as I'm doing this, which kind of naturally happens by holding on to the previous loop, is flattening it down a bit so it doesn't get too thick or too 3D, but it kind of just flattens it out nicely. And then I'm just smoothing out my wire here if it has any unwanted little bends or curves in it. Then we made our way towards the bottom again. You can see this is kind of just another round that we're doing. So again, keep hold of it, and then on the bottom here, go around the back of the loop, back over the top, and then around the front. Now that got a little bit less curvy, but that's why you want to check that while you're in kind of the area, you could say, because you can always then adjust it while this part is still open. And you can also use your pliers here, because you can get in there more in a specific place where you feel like you need to adjust anything. Because you don't want any parts, like this is pretty rounded, but this is pretty straight. So obviously that makes it a little bit less symmetrical looking. So just adjust anything you need. And you come behind that, and then it naturally goes out towards the final loop there for the second round. So place that, and then we just need to go around the back of that and back over the top, making sure it becomes as symmetrical as possible to the rest. And then we are back with this length of wire towards the very top one. Now what you could do is you could stop here if you just want 2 rounds, but I'm going to be doing another round, but basically it's just the exact same thing. So again, I'm keeping hold of the previous loop and then going now again behind the loop, but we need to make sure we come down behind the second one there. So not just up over that first one, but actually behind the second one. And then bring it around the back of that and back towards the front and over the top. So you can see there you kind of have an extra loop now behind that second one. Same principle as the next one. Go behind the second loop that we made. Smooth out your wire along the way. Come towards the bottom here. Go behind the second one again. Make sure your loop is not too straight, like this one kind of just got a little bit too straight. We're just getting some nice curves in there. Bringing it over towards the final one, and again coming behind the second loop. So there we go. That is now the third round, and you could really do however many rounds you got. It also really depends on the space that you have available to you, because it kind of is going to be a bit different every single time because it is freehand that we're doing this. But you can see by making the different lengths, so the short ones up here and the longer ones down here between the loops, it kind of gets this cross shape. But this is then the basic structure in place. Now what I'm going to then do is just cut off the excess here, so it's going to be a bit easier to work with because it's still attached to the reel. So I'm just going to cut off just so there's that little short length left, because then what we need to do is start to fully secure this and place the shape, but then also finish off these lengths of this base wire. Now first of all, I'm just going to finish off the wire that's coming towards the front there that I was using to create the whole shape with. So I've got my chain nose because it's a little bit easier to grip onto it. So just kind of gently bring it open without obviously affecting the shape if you can help it. Because then what we need to do is this end needs to come through between the space, so on this side of the cross, but between the top one and the middle one. So you can see there. And then basically I'm just using the pliers here because it's a bit easier to grip to push them through there with. So they're coming through that space right before the very final time we brought the wire over in the middle there. Now of course just try and make sure you keep the shape in place, so especially out here by the loops, but then it's now coming out towards the back of the piece, and basically we just want to then cut it down and tuck it away. So it's a matter of just finding a bit of space in between the other wires. So I'm just going to bring it kind of out towards the loop. Then I'm going to take my flush cutters and cut it down. Not too much. I still have a little bit of an end left, because I then take that, just kind of lift it open a bit, and then I like to grab the very end of the wire with my pliers, chain nose, and just bend that very tip bit inwards, and then start to kind of push it in to go more or less into the other loops. And then doing that also make sure that the end isn't sticking out and away from the piece, whether it's on the back or the front, but it's kind of nestling in between the wires that are crossing over and under each other. So something like that, and obviously just double check the front to make sure you're happy with how it looks, that nothing has moved too much out of place. But then that's that one finished off. Then we just have the other one left. Now then the final wire there, as you can see, that is actually, that we left part of the structure, so that completes this side here, which is why I left a bit of a longer length, and obviously also enough to finish it off. Again, I just want to cut it down a little bit just because it's harder to get a longer length through. So I'm just cutting it down so it's easier to get through where I want it to. So basically, again, we have to bring this down somewhere around this side loops, or these side loops, because that then completes the shape. So you can kind of push it back a little bit gently, and then what I do is bring it up through the loop from the back, but not the outer one, basically the second one. So you're probably going to be able to see, especially in yours, that you have little gaps there. The wires are completely tight next to each other. So I basically want to get this wire through one of those little gaps. So I just got it through, and then I'm just grabbing onto it here with my pliers because it's only a short little end that's peeking through. So you can see it's actually coming out from through the top of that second loop. So the middle one basically on this side. And just to make sure that it stays in the pattern so it doesn't look too out of place or anything, you want to just double check how it looks. If you need to adjust anything more, you can do that now before we just finish it off. But then otherwise, all that's left to do is then I'm going to cut down the wire again, because we basically just need to bend it around and then tuck it away. So we just need to have enough length left to do that. So just a couple of millimeters or so. Something a little bit like that. Then again I take my chain nose pliers and grab right in the very end and start to bend it into the point where I wanted to come back down through. Again, just so the end nestles into the nooks and crannies between all the wires. so you can't feel it catching or scratching on anything. So obviously we want them to be nice to wear. And then it's securely out of the way. Just make sure you run your fingers over there so you can't feel it. Otherwise you just have to tuck it in a bit more. And then that wire is finished off as well. And you basically have your complete shape of your cross. Now obviously you could leave it like this if you just like how this looks without adding any beads or anything. And then just use the top loop or whatever else you want to do to attach chain or something. Or what I'm then going to show you is how I also add in some beads to add a bit of colour. So this is where we want to cut a length of a 0.25 mil. Now it's hard to say exactly how long length you're going to need because I did it by freehand, and if you do that as well, it could be a different size you end up with, or you purposely choose to do a different size. So I just personally kind of like to cut the length that I prefer to work with. So maybe about 1.5 meters or so, just to be on the safe side. Because if I can, I prefer to do the whole piece in one go as far as possible. I always feel that way, but even if you don't have enough, you can easily add in a new length of wire somewhere and then keep weaving with that. So it's not too big of a deal how long a length you cut, whatever you feel comfortable with basically. Now what I then do is put the two ends of my wire here that I cut together, because what we need to do is find the midpoint, and I have that down here. So I'm just keeping hold of that, and I then want to start out from this midpoint here. So I bring my cross back in, and basically we need to start from the bottom. It's just what I find works the best for adding in the beads here. So that means I'm kind of just going to work with one side of this weaving wire first, because obviously that will be using both hands. But first of all I need to attach it, so the midpoint roughly, doesn't have to be precise, I put behind that bottom loop, and then I'm just attaching this by basically putting this through the loop. So that actually means that we're coiling around the wire that we may use to make the structure with, and I'm putting it through again in the same direction. Now I'm making sure that these wraps or coils that I'm doing are flat next to each other, and also that they're nice and tight together. But you can see as well it does move on the base wire, which is fine. But then what I'm going to do here is we basically need to come across the bottom of this loop. So the wire is attached now, so now we just got to keep wrapping with it. And I'm also going to attach my first bead down here, but like I said, we need to come across the bottom of this loop down here, so the bottom curve, so we end up with a wire of these weaving wires on either side of it. So now you can see I've ended up with my wires going towards opposite sides there, and this is then the perfect little space to add our first bead. Now I've already got it ready, so I have the bead here, and I'm going to first of all just attach it, or add it onto one of the wires, and I'm going to let it drop all the way down. And then as you can see, I'm bringing it across, it's going to sit perfectly just there in the curve. Now we need to bring the other wire through the same bead, but in the opposite direction here. So just like that. And you just want to gently pull that through to make sure to not damage the wire with the bead. And also don't get any kinks. And then I'm going to bring it all the way down and then pull from opposite sides. You don't need to pull hard or anything. So that is now the first bead added in there. And what I now want to do is we just need to work with one wire at a time, because obviously we're working on one side at a time now. So we need to just make our way to the next loop, whichever way you want to go, doesn't really matter. But then to attach the bead to the next loop. So what I'm going to do is be coiling around the outer wires. So basically the original first round that we did when we made the shape. So it doesn't matter what side you start on. Just going to grab the end of my wire And then I continue the coil in the same direction here. And still making sure that the coils are nice and tight together. So like that, and just working my way all the way along that wire. So I now wrapped a little bit further here, and you can see I've got to the point where my base wires are starting to cross over each other, and they're also going to be going through some of the other loops. So you just want to make sure to keep only coiling around that same wire the whole way, which on the sides here in between the loops is the very outer one. So you just need to kind of weave your wire wherever you need to get through the space, just to be able to coil around that wire to continue it. So obviously you would have to kind of go in and out of the loops in a little bit more intricate way than just through the loop, the single loop down here as you've been doing. But you just want to do that, like I said, until you get to that next loop up here to attach the next bead. So now I made it to the next loop there, and I just wanted to show you how I add in the bead, because down on the first one we added it using 2 wires there across from each other. Here we only have 1. So what I just want to do is, I've already reached the point where I'm on the side of the loop, so if you imagine it kind of is facing this way, I'm on the side of it. And then I just want to drop the bead down. That's going to sit in the loop there. And then what I'm going to do is take my end, and I need to wrap it around the base wire on the other side, so where the wire is coming out through the bead. So just wrap it around nice and tight, and then I'm going to put the wire back through the bead again. So like that, and pull it all the way through there. And then obviously the bead is going to end up sitting, and just make sure we don't get any little kinks that can damage the wire. The bead is going to end up sitting then inside of the loop. And also because I want to continue the coils and not just have a bit of bare wire on the outer edge here, I've gone through the bead now and back to the top. Now I'm just gonna bring it down through to the other side, so I just continue the wraps in the same way. So now we just basically have a single wrap on the bottom part of that loop, but that's just to attach the bead. So what I'm going to do is just keep coiling around the side of the bead basically, so the side of that loop, continue, and then when you reach this little wrap that you've already done down here, you just want to bring the wire behind it and then continue afterwards. And otherwise you always continue and also add your bead to the top one, so along the outer edges basically. So now continued all the way around the outside wire here, and I just want to point out that once you get to from the point down here where it started out, on this side, if you just continue where the wire is, it's actually going to take you to the middle wire on this side. So therefore, I'm going to finish off the wire when I've finished this loop on this side here, but then the wire that I bring all the way around the other side and go around the top one is actually the one that's going to do the outside on this side here. And then also I'm just finishing that off on that side. So once you finished off that wire, you can obviously leave it like this as well, but what I'm then just going to do is add a little bead in the very middle as well. Now the bead that you use there will really depend on the size that you have, because it might be different from one to the other that you make, because it's quite organically done and it's not specific that they're all going to be the same. So the gap that I have here, it's going to fit the size bead that I've already used pretty nicely. You might use a bigger one or a smaller one, or you might just leave it out. But to do that, I've just cut another length of my weaving wire here, so the fine one, and there's no specific length because again it really depends how large your hole in the middle is. So in this case I'm just working with about 50 centimeters. So again, I found roughly where the midpoint is on this wire, so just by putting the ends together gently. And then we, just like when we started out on the outer edge, I also first just want to attach this. So just put it through in the middle here. Now on either side of, we're kind of going to be focusing on this little diamond in the middle. So I've just put my weaving wire here on either side, on wherever you want to start, but again I'm going to start on the bottom. And then I'm just kind of holding on to one, and then I'm just going to use the other one to start weaving around a little bit, and that also then attaches it. I'm coming up on the other side here, and then I'm going to keep weaving up this side for a bit, or coiling rather. Same principle as the outer edge, until I then just get to the point where I want to add the bead in. So doing this, and of course, once I move further up, just go over to use the wire on the other side as well, going up the other side. So now I brought both my wires up the sides here, and then it's time to add in the bead. Again, same principle of doing that as at the very bottom. I'm going to first add the bead onto one length of my wire, and then take the other length through the same bead, but in the opposite direction. And then we're just going to gently bring it down, which is then going to end up placing it right there in the middle. And you can kind of push it down. And then you just want to take your wires. The wires have now kind of swapped place, because obviously they're kind of crossing through the bead. But you just want to pick them up on whatever side they're coming out on, and continue wrapping all the way up until they meet up at the very top. So you kind of complete this whole diamond shape in the middle. And then you just want to get rid of your wires, and then once you've done that, you completed your cross. And then to cut off the excess wire there, I'm just going to take my flush cutters and then kind of continue the wire as if it was doing another wrap around the base wire there, but not put it through. What I'm going to do is then cut it off so there's maybe 1 millimeter or so, if that, left, and you can feel a little bit of wire sticking up. Then take my chain nose pliers and push that down, and then I like to roll the end of the wire with the pliers. They're in the same direction that the wrap is going, and that just tucks it in to the center instead of sticking out, so it's not going to catch or scratch on anything. And obviously get rid of the other one as well. So that's just how you want to finish off all the wires throughout adding your beads. So then to attach a chain, to obviously be able to wear it, I'm just going to take a jump ring, open that up, and then I'm just going to add it through that top loop. Now if you find that if you've added beads, obviously, if you've added your bead and there's not really enough space to get a jump ring through, you can always just push the bead down a bit, use your pliers as well if you need to. Obviously be careful about it so you don't break the wire, but just enough so you can then actually force that jump ring through, and you can see it has a nice little dangle to it. And obviously you just need the chain first of all as well. I'm going to add that in to the jump ring as well there, close it back up, and make sure it's closed securely so nothing's gonna fall out. So I just put a jump ring through that top loop, whether it's with or without a bead, and then obviously you have the cross hanging nicely from that, and you've now attached your chain to it, and it's ready to wear. So whether you want to add beads or not, the cross itself is really impactful just with the wire as well, but of course the beads can also add that little bit of touch of colour and sparkle. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial for how to make this cross. Now make sure to check out my channel. I have loads of other tutorials in general, but also a whole playlist with Celtic inspired designs. So if that's something for you, I'm going to make sure to leave a link to it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.